your brother the account number, or I'm calling your father's lawyer and telling him you forged the power of attorney." My mother didn't say hello. She didn't ask if I'd eaten. She slid a piece of paper across the kitchen island like she was serving a subpoena, and she stood there with her arms crossed, waiting for me to fold. I was 31 years old. I had driven 4 hours through a February snowstorm because she'd texted me that she needed help with some paperwork. I still had highway salt on my boots. The paper on the counter was a wire transfer authorization. The amount at the top was $340,000. That was the number in my father's estate account, the one I had been named executor of 6 weeks earlier, standing in a lawyer's office in downtown Ottawa while my brother sat in the parking lot because he couldn't be bothered to come inside. Before I tell you what I said next, drop a comment and tell me what's the most manipulative thing a family member has ever asked you to do. Because I've heard some stories, and I want to know if mine makes the list. I looked at the transfer form. I looked at my mother. Then I looked around the kitchen I'd grown up in, the one my father had renovated himself the summer I turned 12, the one where he used to make his terrible instant coffee at 5 in the morning before driving to the site. He'd been a civil engineer for 34 years. He was meticulous about everything: measurements, timelines, documentation. He was also meticulous about his will. I knew because I had helped him update it 2 years before he died. He'd asked me specifically, not my brother, not my mother, me, because I worked in estate administration at a law firm in Toronto, not as a lawyer, as a certified estate administrator and licensed paralegal. I knew exactly what those documents said, and I knew exactly what my mother was asking me to do was not legal. But I didn't say that yet. I set my keys down on the counter and pulled out the chair that had always been mine at the table, the one closest to the window that looked out over the backyard, and I sat down. The yard was buried under 2 feet of snow. My father's old hockey net was still out there, slowly collapsing into itself. I wasn't 31 in that moment. I was 14, sitting at the same table watching my parents have the same argument they always had when my brother came home with another problem: a car accident, a failed class, a girlfriend whose parents were threatening to press charges. It was always something. And it was always, somehow, everyone else's job to fix it. My father fixed things quietly. He paid, he negotiated, he made phone calls. He never complained about it to me directly, but I saw the strain. I saw the way his shoulders looked when he came home from work, and my mother had already spent an hour on the phone with my brother. I saw how he looked at me sometimes, a little too long, a little too grateful, like I was the one steady thing in a house that was always slightly tilted. He told me once, when I was in my mid-20s and we were driving back from a Senators game, that he was proud of me for building something on my own. He said it simply, no ceremony. Then he changed the subject to the power play, and we never talked about it again. But I kept it. I kept it the way you keep something small and important in your coat pocket, just to know it's there. He died in October. Cardiac event, unexpected, the kind that happens fast. He was 63. The will was clear. The estate, which included the family home, his RRSPs, and a substantial amount in a joint investment account that had been in his name alone, was to be administered by me, with distribution split between my mother's ongoing living expenses and 2 equal shares from my brother and me, released in stages over 24 months to ensure stability. My brother's first installment was not due for another 8 months. My mother's papers said differently. I already know what you're thinking. Just say no. Just leave. But you don't know my mother when she's decided something. And you don't know my brother. He needs the money now, she said. She had moved to the other side of the island, positioning herself between me and the door in a way that was probably unconscious. Probably. He's in a situation. What kind of situation? Financial. I waited. She exhaled. He borrowed money. From someone he shouldn't have borrowed from. And the interest it's not the kind of interest that waits. There it was. My brother, 44 years old, senior by 13 years, had borrowed money from a private lender. The kind you find when the banks have already said no twice, and the lender wanted it back, with whatever they considered interest. How much does he owe? $80,000. I did not react. In my line of work, when a number surprises you, you write it down and you keep your face neutral. Numbers are just numbers until you understand the full picture. And he wants to use his estate distribution to cover it, I said. He wants his money. It's his money. It's his money, Hazel. Hazel? My name? The first time she'd used it since I walked in the door. The distribution schedule exists for a reason, I said. Dad was specific about. Your father is gone. Her voice didn't waver. She said it like a closing argument. And your brother is here and he needs help, and you are sitting on a pile of money that belongs to this family and acting like some kind of bureaucrat. Bureaucrat. After 4 hours in a snowstorm, I looked at the transfer form again. It had my name on the executor line. It had my brother's account number. All it needed was my signature and a call to the estate trustee at the bank. If I authorize a full early distribution outside the schedule, I said slowly, I breach my fiduciary duty. I can be held personally liable. I can lose my license. Nobody is going to report you. The estate's beneficiaries include a structured charitable remainder, I said. There's an automatic audit trigger if distributions deviate more than 15% from the scheduled timeline. It's built into the trust document. I paused. That was not entirely true. The charitable remainder was real. The automatic audit trigger was something I was improvising based on enough truth to be plausible. But I needed her to slow down. I needed her to stop seeing a door and start seeing a wall. She blinked. What does that mean? It means if I move that money right now, there is a paper trail that goes directly to the estate trustee, the CRA, and potentially the public trustee's office if the deviation triggers a review. I said it evenly, like I was reading from a manual. And if that happens, the entire estate gets frozen pending investigation. Nobody gets anything. Not your monthly income, not my brother's debt payment, nothing. For potentially 18 months. My mother's hands went still on the counter. So what do we do? She said. Quieter now. I kept my voice flat. Administrative, there might be a way to structure an advance against his future distributions as a secured internal loan. It would show on the estate record as a formal transaction rather than an irregular disbursement, but I'd need to draft the paperwork tonight, file it with the trustee by morning before the weekly reconciliation, and get a notarized acknowledgement from my brother. Every word I said was rooted in something real. The internal loan mechanism was legitimate. The weekly reconciliation was not a thing. But I said it with the same tone I use when I'm explaining probate timelines to a grieving family, and my mother heard procedure, and procedure to her meant someone in charge. Can you do that? She asked. I can do a version of it, I said. But I need to make some calls. And I need my brother here, tonight. Whatever he signed with this lender, I need to see it. She called him. He arrived 40 minutes later, smelling like he'd been somewhere with bad ventilation and worse decisions, and he sat down at the table across from me with the particular expression of a man who has never once faced a consequence he couldn't charm or borrow his way out of. You came, he said, like I'd done him a favor. I drove through a blizzard, I said. Show me the loan document. He slid it across the table. I read it. It was ugly. A private lending agreement with a compound interest clause that bordered on criminal, drafted on what looked like a template someone had downloaded and modified. 60,000 principal. With the interest calculated the way they'd written it, he owed closer to 90. While I read, I thought about the summer I was 16. My brother had just turned 29 and he was supposedly working in BC in some kind of project management role. My father had sent him money that summer. I found out later it was $15,000. I found out even later that it was the money my parents had put aside for my first year of university. I went to university anyway. I worked 3 jobs in my first 2 years. I graduated with a paralegal diploma and a certification in estate law and $40,000 of student debt that I paid off myself over 6 years. My brother doesn't have a diploma. He has a string of titles on a resume and a gift for making people feel like they'd be stupid not to trust him. My father paid for his mistakes every time. His car repossessed in his 30s, the business that collapsed, the divorce settlement. Every time my father wrote a quiet check and my mother made a phone call, and I watched from whatever distance I was at and thought, when does it stop? It stopped in October, with a cardiac event in a hospital in Ottawa, in a room I got to 12 minutes too late because I was on a highway and my brother was supposedly already there but wasn't. I looked up from the loan document. This lender, I said, did you sign anything else with them? Any collateral? He shifted in his seat, just a personal guarantee. On what asset? Silence. On what asset? I repeated. On the house, my mother said very quietly. I set the document down. My brother had signed a personal guarantee on a private loan using the family home, the home that was now part of the estate I administered, the home that had not yet been transferred to my mother's name as part of the distribution process, as implied collateral, not legally binding, but enough to make a threatening letter look real, enough to make my mother panic, enough to make her call me in a blizzard with a wire transfer form. I sat with that for a moment. The kitchen was very quiet. The fridge hummed. Outside, the wind had picked up and was pushing snow against the window and sheets. Then I opened my bag. "Okay," I said. "Here's what we're going to do." I set my laptop on the table. I opened the estate file I had kept current since the day I was appointed executor. Every transaction, every scheduled distribution, every communication with the bank trustee. 6 weeks of documentation, organized the way my father organized everything, precisely, completely, with nothing left ambiguous. "I'm going to make a call," I said. "I have a contact at the lender registry who can run a compliance check on this loan agreement tonight. If the interest structure violates the criminal code, and the way they've written this compound clause, it might, then the enforceability of the entire agreement is in question." My brother sat up straighter. "What does that mean?" "It means they can't collect what they're not legally entitled to collect," I said. "And it means if they've been running this kind of agreement with multiple borrowers, they have a very strong incentive not to attract attention from the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada." I didn't have a contact at the lender registry. I had a former colleague who worked in financial compliance and who had texted me 3 weeks ago to catch up. But the criminal code section I referenced, Section 347, criminal interest rate, was real. Any interest rate that works out to over 60% annually is a criminal offense in Canada. The way they'd written his compound clause, it was close. Maybe over. That part I actually believed. "Give me an hour," I said. I went to the guest room with my laptop and I worked. I drafted 2 documents. The first was a formal estate advance agreement, the legitimate version of what my mother had asked me to do, structured as a documented internal loan against my brother's future distribution, with a repayment schedule built in, fully compliant with the estate terms. $80,000 advanced now, deducted from his scheduled release with interest accrued back to the estate, legitimate, legal, protectable. The second document was a letter to the lender. It outlined a Section 347 concern. It noted that the agreement had been reviewed by an estate administrator in the context of a deceased's estate, that the implied collateral reference to real property was not binding as the property remained under probate administration, and that any attempt to enforce collection against estate assets would constitute interference with estate administration under Ontario's Succession Law Reform Act. It further noted that should the lender pursue any collection action, the agreement itself would be referred to the FCAC and the Ontario Ministry of Finance for review. I wrote it on firm letterhead. My firm, my credentials at the bottom. Then I sat there in the dark in my father's guest room, listening to the wind, and I let myself feel it for just a minute, the exhaustion of it, the weight of being the one who shows up, who reads the documents, who drives through the storm, the particular grief of losing the one parent who actually saw you, and then having to sit at his kitchen table and be squeezed by the ones who never did. I thought about the hockey net in the backyard, the instant coffee, the drive home from the Senators game. Then I closed that feeling like a folder and went back to the kitchen. I sat down. I set both documents on the table. "The loan agreement has a compliance problem," I said. "The interest calculation as written puts them above the Section 347 threshold. They almost certainly know this. It's why the agreement is drafted the way it is, vague enough to threaten, fragile enough to drop if anyone looks too hard." My brother stared at me. "I've drafted a letter on firm letterhead that outlines the exposure. If you send this to them, the realistic outcome is they negotiate down to principal only, or they walk away entirely to avoid scrutiny." "You can do that," he said. "I just did," I said. I slid the second document to him. Then I slid the second document to him. Then I slid the first one to my mother. "This is a formal advance agreement. It moves $60,000 against his distribution, enough to cover the principal if they do negotiate. It's documented, it's compliant, it protects the estate, and it protects me professionally." I looked at her. "This is what I can sign, not the wire transfer." She read it. She's not a stupid woman. She understood the difference between what she'd asked for and what I was offering. "And the lender," she said, Send the letter. See what they say. I looked at my brother. But I need something in return. He looked wary. Good. He should. I reached into my bag and pulled out a document I had prepared 6 weeks ago, the day after I was named executor, and had been waiting for the right moment to use. It was a formal acknowledgement of prior estate advances. It listed, with dates and amounts sourced from my father's financial records, which I had full access to as executor, every sum my parents had transferred to my brother over the previous 11 years. The car, the business, the divorce, the various smaller payments my father had recorded with his engineer's precision in a spreadsheet I'd found on his desktop, labeled simply family account. The total was $263,000. I had cross-referenced it against the estate's equal distribution formula. Under the will, my brother and I were to receive equal shares. But if prior advances were treated as distributions already received, which they legally could be, under the doctrine of equalization, his remaining entitlement was substantially reduced. I had not raised this yet. I had been waiting. I need you to sign this acknowledgement, I said, confirming that these prior transfers are on record. You don't have to agree they affect your distribution right now, but they go on file as part of the estate record. The kitchen was very quiet. You've been planning this, my mother said. She didn't sound angry. She sounded tired, maybe a little scared. Dad was planning it, I said. He kept every record. I just read them. My brother picked up the document. He read it slowly. I watched him do the math, and I watched the moment he understood that the number on that page was bigger than the number on the lender's agreement. That signing a simple acknowledgement might be the cheapest thing he did tonight. He signed it. My mother signed the advance agreement. I called the estate trustees after hours line and logged the advance as a formal transaction with the reference number I'd already prepared. Then I emailed the lender letter from my firm account with read receipt requested at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in February. By Thursday morning, the lender's representative called my brother and offered to settle for principal only, $58,000, payable over 90 days. I wasn't surprised. The letter wasn't a bluff. The Section 347 exposure was real. People who run those kinds of agreements are not interested in courtrooms. My brother called me to say thank you. I told him the advance would be deducted from his distribution with interest. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "That's fair," which might be the most honest thing he's said to me in 20 years. My mother and I haven't talked much since that night. Not badly. Just, there's a different kind of quiet between us now. The kind that comes when someone realizes you've known something for a long time and chose the right moment to say it. She asked me once, a few weeks later, if I was angry at her. I thought about it honestly before I answered. I'm tired, I said. But I'm okay. She nodded. She understood that was the most I had. 6 months later, the estate administration was complete. The house transferred to my mother's name. My brother received his remaining distribution, reduced by the advance and the equalization notation, a fact he acknowledged in writing, which meant he couldn't contest it later. My share was intact. My father's charitable remainder went to the engineering scholarship fund he'd specified at the University of Ottawa for first-generation students. I went to the ceremony when they announced the first recipient. I stood in the back of the room and watched a 20-year-old from Sudbury shake the dean's hand, and I thought about my father at 5 in the morning with his terrible coffee, building things that lasted. I don't go back to that house much, but when I do, I always look at the hockey net in the backyard. It's still out there. My mother hasn't moved it. I think she knows it's not really hers to move. If you've ever been the one in your family who reads the documents, who shows up anyway, who does the right thing even when it costs you, you're not alone. And you don't owe anyone your silence. I keep thinking about that wire transfer form sitting on my father's kitchen island. How clean it looked. How simple. Just a number, an account, a line for a signature. My mother had probably convinced herself it was simple too, that I would see the form, feel the old familiar pull of keeping the peace, and reach for the pen. She wasn't wrong that the pull existed. I felt it. I've been feeling it my whole life. That quiet pressure to be the one who doesn't make things harder, who absorbs the cost so everyone else can stay comfortable. It has a weight to it that people on the outside don't understand. It doesn't feel like weakness when you're in it. It feels like love, or what you were taught love looks like. What changed for me wasn't a single moment of courage. It was years of watching the same pattern repeat. My brother's crisis, my parents' scramble, my silence, and slowly understanding that my silence wasn't keeping the family together. It was just making me smaller. Every time I didn't say the thing I knew to be true, I was teaching everyone in that room that my knowledge, my work, my limits, didn't need to be taken seriously. I was the one handing them that lesson. My father understood something I took a long time to learn. He kept every record not because he was suspicious or calculating, but because he was honest. He believed that clarity was a form of care, that knowing exactly where things stood protected everyone, including the people you loved who couldn't protect themselves from their own choices. That spreadsheet on his desktop, labeled family account, wasn't a trap he set. It was the truth he lived by, written down so it wouldn't disappear when he did. When I drafted that acknowledgement document and set it on the table next to the advance agreement, I wasn't trying to punish my brother. I was doing what my father would have done, making the reality visible so no one could pretend it wasn't there. That's what integrity looks like when it's not dramatic. It's not a speech. It's a piece of paper with accurate numbers on it, placed calmly in front of people who would prefer not to see them. The intelligence I used that night, the Section 347 research, the estate law, the compliance letter, none of it came from nowhere. It came from years of showing up to work on days when I was tired, of taking courses I paid for myself, of building something real when no one in my family was paying attention to what I was building. Knowledge only protects you if you've actually done the work to have it. There's no shortcut for that. You either know the thing or you don't, and the moment you need it is never the moment you have time to learn it. What I want to say to anyone sitting in a situation like mine is this. The exhaustion you feel from always being the responsible one is real, and it's allowed to be real. But there is a difference between being worn down by a role you chose and being erased by one that was assigned to you without your consent. You are allowed to do the right thing and protect yourself at the same time. Those are not opposites. My father knew that. It took me longer, but I got there. The hockey net is still in the backyard. I don't need to move it to move on.